214 BC, Mediterranean Sea, coast of Sicily. 60 Roman warships, each carrying 120 elite soldiers, advanced toward the city of Syracuse. Red sails, polished armor, war drums. On board D7. 200 veteran legionaries who've conquered entire nations. Leading them Marcus Claudius Marcellus, the sword of Rome. A general whose name makes kings surrender without fighting. His orders from the Senate are clear: take Syracuse. At any cost. This should be easy. Rome has never lost a siege. Their engineering is legendary. Their soldiers are the best trained warriors on earth. Syracuse. Just another Greek city that made the mistake of switching sides. The Romans expect to take it in days. Maybe a week if the defenders are stubborn. But on the walls of Syracuse, a 75-year-old man watches the approaching fleet. He's not a soldier, not a king, not even a general. He's a mathematician. His name Archimedes. And he's about to do something no army has ever done before. Humiliate Rome. What happens in the next few hours will shatter Roman confidence forever. 30-ton warships yanked from the sea like toys. Assault towers costing fortunes, smashed from impossible distances. Roman soldiers, the most disciplined warriors alive, fleeing in terror, screaming one name, Archimedes. This is the siege of Syracuse. The day a single genius with nothing but his mind defeated 60,000 Roman soldiers. The moment when science proved more powerful than the greatest military force on earth. How does one old man stop an empire? What weapons came from his brain that terrified Rome's bravest warriors? Let's find out. To understand what's about to happen, you need to know the world in 214 BC. The Mediterranean is on fire. Rome and Carthage, two superpowers, are tearing each other apart in the Second Punic War. Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian genius, has done the impossible, crossed the Alps with elephants. Now he's bleeding Rome on Italian soil. Italy trembles. The Roman Senate is desperate. In this chaos, Syracuse makes a fatal mistake. It switches sides. This Sicilian city, jewel of the Greek world, had been Rome's ally for decades. But when the old King Hiero dies, his young successor Hieronymus decides to ally with Carthage instead. For Rome, this is unforgivable. Syracuse sits at the strategic center of Sicily. Controlling it means dominating the island. Losing it means handing the central Mediterranean to Hannibal. The Senate sends Marcellus with one mission: make an example. Remind the world that Rome never forgets. Marcellus is 52 years old. He's conquered more cities than most men can count, crushed rebellions in Gaul, massacred Celtic armies. His nickname, the Sword of Rome, isn't poetic. It's literal. Where Marcellus arrives, resistance dies. He brings 60 warships, 200 elite marines, plus thousands more soldiers on land. He also brings the Sambuca, floating siege towers 4 stories high, mounted on pairs of ships. Once deployed, these towers can drop 120 soldiers directly onto enemy walls in seconds. They're nightmare machines. They've taken fortress after fortress, but inside Syracuse's walls lives someone Marcellus has never faced before. Archimedes was born around 287 BC in Syracuse. From childhood, he showed extraordinary brilliance. He traveled to Alexandria, the intellectual center of the ancient world, where he studied with Euclid's successors. His genius flowered in ways nobody imagined. He calculated pi with astonishing precision, discovered the principle of buoyancy while bathing, ran naked through streets shouting "Eureka!" when he understood how to measure irregular volumes, developed the Archimedes screw, a device lifting water that's still used 200 years later. But his most famous quote would become prophecy. When explaining the lever principle, he said with absolute confidence, "Give me a place to stand, and I will move the world." Rome is about to discover he wasn't joking. Archimedes wasn't a warrior. He was a scientist, spent his days solving geometric problems, drawing figures in sand, lost in worlds of numbers. Politics mattered little, armies mattered less. But when Syracuse's young king asked for help, when he said Rome was coming to destroy the city, something changed. Archimedes was 75 years old. He could have hidden in his study, focused on mathematics, stayed safe. Instead, he made a decision that changed military history. If Rome wants brute force, he thought, we'll give them science. For months before Marcellus arrived, the genius worked in secret. He transformed Syracuse's walls into something the world had never seen. Not simple defenses, machines. Weapons that defied logic, pulley and lever systems lifting impossible weights, catapults adjustable by distance, revolutionary innovation, and something else. Something that would make Roman soldiers flee screaming, the claw of Archimedes. But here's the deepest irony. Archimedes hated these machines. To him, they were vulgar distractions from real work, pure mathematics. Historian Plutarch wrote that Archimedes considered war machines, geometry games unworthy of documentation. He left not one plan, Not one drawing, not one technical description. What we know comes from Romans who faced them, from historians who recorded the terror they caused, from legends born when the bravest soldiers on earth fled screaming. While Marcellus sailed toward Syracuse with absolute confidence, while legionaries sharpened weapons and engineers prepared siege towers, none knew the truth. They weren't attacking a city. They were attacking the laboratory of a genius, and that genius had months to prepare. Spring 214 BC arrived with terrifying news for Syracuse. Lookouts in the highest towers spotted something on the horizon that froze blood: red sails. Dozens of red sails approaching like a blood stain on blue Mediterranean. Rome had arrived. The fleet was a spectacle of absolute power. Marcellus brought 65 quinqueremes, the most advanced warships of the time. Each measured 40 meters long, powered by 170 rowers moving 5 rows of oars in perfect synchronization. On board each ship 120 Marines, elite soldiers trained for naval combat and coastal assault. But the most terrifying thing wasn't the ships. It was the machines they carried. The sambuca, floating siege towers that were the terror of any defender. Imagine mobile platforms 4 stories high mounted on 2 ships tied side by side. At the top, drawbridges that could deploy directly onto enemy walls. Once they touched stone, 1 in 20 soldiers could cross in seconds, flooding fortifications before defenders could react. Floating skyscrapers of death. Marcellus, commanding this apocalyptic force, personified Roman military power. At 52, he'd conquered more cities than most could name, crushed rebellions in Gaul, massacred entire Celtic armies. His soldiers adored him with fanatical loyalty. These were veteran legionaries who'd marched across Europe. Roman discipline ran through their veins like blood. When Marcellus ordered attack, they attacked. When he ordered die, they died. No doubts, no fear. In the Roman camp that night, bets were placed on how long Syracuse would last. The optimists gave 3 days. The conservatives gave a week. Nobody, absolutely nobody, imagined failure. How could they? Rome was invincible. Marcellus gathered commanders on his flagship the night before attack. The plan simple, brutal, effective. Syracuse will be ours before sunset tomorrow, declared Marcellus with certainty of one who'd never known defeat. His officers toasted. Soldiers sharpened weapons. Rowers rested. None knew that inside those walls, an old man had spent months turning physics into weapons of war. While Romans slept confident on ships, Archimedes made final adjustments. He didn't sleep. Couldn't. Not until he saw if it would actually work. That night, while Marcellus dreamed of inevitable triumph and legionaries slept lulled by waves, Archimedes walked the walls. He was 75. Probably couldn't lift a combat shield without staggering. But he'd done something no warrior could. Turned mathematics into terror. When dawn broke over the Mediterranean that spring morning, when Roman trumpets sounded and oars began striking water in perfect sync, when thousands of throats shouted the war cry that had conquered the known world, Archimedes simply waited. Let them approach. Let their towers reach the distance he'd calculated with mathematical precision. Let Roman arrogance blind them completely. Then he'd give the order that would change war forever. Dawn of the attack arrived with unnatural silence. Seagulls that normally screeched over Syracuse's port had disappeared. As if nature sensed carnage about to unfold, defenders on walls watched silently as the Roman fleet organized into attack formation. No shouts, no panic, just tense, unnatural calm. Archimedes stood on the highest wall next to machines he designed. His wrinkled hands held a staff not as weapon but measuring tool. His eyes, still sharp despite age, calculated distances, speeds, angles. For him, this wasn't battle. It was a mathematical problem waiting to be solved. Marcellus gave the attack order as sun fully emerged. Roman trumpets tore silence with metallic roar. 170 rowers in each quinquereme plunged oars into water in unison. The sea turned white foam as 60 warships advanced like hungry predators. The sambuca, those nightmare floating towers, led the assault. Each carried deadly load of soldiers shouting Mars's name, god of war, shields gleaming in sun, spears pointing skyward like steel forest. The roar of war cries was deafening, designed to break enemy wall before first blow. On Syracuse's walls nobody moved. Roman ships approached for 400 archers on sambuca began firing. Clouds of arrows over defenses. Soldiers on deck beat shields rhythmically. War drum preceding fall of hundreds of cities. 250 meters. Marcellus, standing on flagship deck, smiled. Everything going according to plan. Minutes until towers reached walls. Bridges would fall. His men would cross. Syracuse would burn before noon, 200 meters. Then Archimedes raised his hand. What happened next defies description. But Roman historians who witnessed it tried capturing horror with words that still make us tremble. The walls of Syracuse literally came alive. First came the catapults, but not catapults like Romans knew. From openings they hadn't even noticed, a deluge of projectiles began. Stone size of men flew with impossible precision. They didn't fall randomly like normal bombardment. Each stone seemed to have calculated destination. One struck directly a quinquireme's mast, snapping it like dry branch. Another hit right at waterline, opening hole through which water poured in torrents. Third completely shattered a sambuca, sending soldiers into sea with armor on. They sank like stones. Screams drowned in seconds. But most terrifying wasn't the damage, it was the precision. Roman engineers had calculated traditional catapults had huge error margin at those distances. That's why they attacked in mass, hoping volume would compensate inaccuracy. But these Greek catapults struck exactly where intended. A centurion shouted, trying to reorganize men. His voice cut off when stone pierced deck where he stood, turning him and 5 soldiers into unrecognizable pulp. Marcellus ordered accelerate, had to reach walls quickly. Get out of range of those infernal machines. Rowers, terrified but disciplined, increased pace, muscles burned, lungs burned. But they advanced 150 meters, then the claw appeared. At first, Romans didn't understand what they were seeing. A huge beam emerged from behind walls, extending over water like Titan's arm. At its end, iron hook size of a man, sinister in sun. It moved with unnatural fluidity, controlled by invisible mechanisms. The leading sambuca was less than 100 meters from walls when Hook descended. What happened next etched in memory of every Roman who witnessed it. Hook caught ship's bow with metallic impact, echoing over battle noise. For a second, nothing. Soldiers on sambuca looked at each other confused. Some laughed nervously. It was just a hook. Then the mechanical arm began to rise. The physics was impossible. According to everything Romans knew, a quinquireme weighed 30 tons. 30 tons of wood, metal, men equipment. It couldn't be lifted. Absurd. Impossible. But Archimedes understood something nobody else had. With right lever and right fulcrum, there's no weight that can't be moved. Ship's bow began emerging from water. First slowly, as if invisible God's hand testing strength. Then faster. Water fell in cascades from ascending hull. Rowers in rear, still in water, screamed in terror watching front of their ship torn from sea. Soldiers on deck, 120 armed men lost balance. Some fell overboard. Others clung desperately to whatever they could. Their screams chorus of absolute panic. Ship reached 4 degrees angle, 60 or 70 degrees, almost vertical. Bow pointing to sky like accusing finger. Then Archimedes ordered release the hook. The quinquireme fell. No words in any language can capture that horror. 30 tons of wood and metal falling from 15 meters high directly onto water. Impact like thunder. Water column rose high as walls themselves. Ship broke in half. Structure not designed for vertical force. It disintegrated. 120 Roman soldiers, best warriors in world, died in seconds. Some crushed by debris. Others drowned, dragged down by armor weight. Few survived long enough to swim to other ships. Eyes bulging, babbling incoherently about giant arms and enraged gods. Marcellus watched from flagship. Paralyzed. In 30 years military career, dozens of battles, countless sieges. Never seen anything remotely like it. His mind refused to process. But no time for shock. Second claw emerged from another wall section. Then third. Fourth. Roman ships, moments before advancing in perfect formation, now desperately tried retreating. But rowers were terrified. Some rowed forward, others backward. Order turned to chaos. Ships collided. Officers shouted contradictory orders. One claw grabbed another quinquireme by side, simply capsized it like child tipping toy in bathtub. Men fell into water like ants. Another hooked a sambuca and shook it violently before releasing, sending soldiers flying through air like ragdolls. The ocean around Syracuse began turning red. But claws weren't Archimedes' only weapons. From smaller wall openings, other machines appeared. Short-range catapults launching smaller but faster projectiles. These didn't seek to sink ships. They sought to kill men. Stones size of human heads rained on decks. One struck soldier directly in chest, piercing armor like parchment, exiting through back. Another cleanly decapitated 3 men in line. Then came the beams. From wall tops, huge metal-wrapped wooden logs began falling, but not randomly. Attached to chains controlled by mechanisms. They struck ship decks with devastating force, crushing men, breaking structures, then withdrawn upward to strike again, and again and again. An entire ship literally hammered until it sank. Soldiers jumped desperately, preferring drowning to being crushed. Captain, veteran of 20 campaigns, stayed at post until end, clinging to helm while his world crumbled. The Roman attack, supposed to take hours, disintegrated in less than 30 minutes. Marcellus, pale-faced and trembling hands, ordered retreat. His voice, normally strong and sure, sounded broken. Trumpet sounded signal no Roman legionary ever expected retreat. Ships that could still move rode frantically away from walls. Left behind thousands of dead or dying comrades in water. 6 sunken quinqueremes, 3 destroyed sambuca, each costing a fortune. But more than that, their confidence. When Roman fleet regrouped 1 kilometer away, Marcellus counted losses: 1 Zaudoff men dead, 100 off wounded, 6 warships sunk, 3 assault towers destroyed, and worst, not one Roman soldier had touched Syracuse's walls. Officers looked to their general, waiting for orders. Marcellus looked toward walls where somewhere an elderly mathematician had done the impossible. Something broke in Roman army's psyche at that moment. These men had faced naked German barbarians fighting without fear. Fought fanatical Celts throwing themselves against spears singing. Survived Hannibal's war elephants. But this, different. Not fighting warriors. Fighting something incomprehensible. Machines defying nature's laws. Invisible enemy turning science into terror. That night, as Romans processed what they'd experienced, rumors began. Machines couldn't be human work. Had to be divine. Archimedes wasn't a man. He was sorcerer, or worse, instrument of furious Greek gods. Some soldiers swore they'd seen rays of light from walls, burning sails, setting fire to wood. Though modern historians doubt famous burning mirrors of Archimedes, at that moment, terrified and traumatized soldiers believed anything. What's indisputable, something changed fundamentally. Marcellus, sword of Rome, general who'd never retreated, made an unthinkable decision. He wouldn't attack walls directly again. When Tribune suggested trying another assault next day, Marcellus looked at him with anger and something no soldier had seen before: fear. "Don't you see?" Marcellus whispered. "We're not fighting an army. We're fighting a monster with 100 hands and 100 eyes. Every time we approach, something new appears. Something impossible." He paused, looking toward distant walls. "That old man, that damned mathematician, has turned the entire city into a killing machine. And we're the insects he's trying to crush." History records Marcellus gave order that day, changing siege nature. No more direct attacks. No more wall-scaling attempts. Instead, what Rome did best when brute force failed: wait, blockade. Starvation. If couldn't take Syracuse by assault, they'd strangle it slowly. But on walls, Archimedes watched Roman fleet retreat and knew he'd won only first battle. War was beginning. And he, 75-year-old man who only wanted to spend last days calculating sphere-cylinder relationships, would have to keep creating death machines. The irony didn't escape him. His greatest gift to world would be his most hated work: weapons that humiliated Rome. Days turned to weeks. Weeks to months. Proud Roman army found itself doing something unimaginable: waiting. Marcellus established camp in hills surrounding Syracuse, far enough to be out of reach of those diabolical machines, close enough to maintain blockade. His fleet patrolled waters at safe distance, ensuring no supplies reached city by sea. In theory, just matter of time. Without food, without fresh water, without reinforcements, Syracuse would surrender. But theory and reality rarely coincide in war. Inside walls, Archimedes didn't rest. Every night, worked under torchlight, perfecting machines, designing new defenses. Assistants begged him to sleep. Old man rejected every request. "Rome doesn't sleep planning to kill us. Why should I sleep defending us?" And he was right. Because Marcellus, though decided against direct attack, hadn't abandoned search for military solution. Every week he tried something new. Every week Archimedes had answer waiting. First Roman strategy: night attack. Marcellus reasoned in darkness his men could approach undetected by those precise machines. Selected best warriors, experience in silent raids, removed metal armor that might shine under moon. Dressed completely black, ordered silence on darkest night, no moon. 500 Roman soldiers rode silently toward walls, used oars wrapped in cloth to muffle sound. Breaths barely whispers, moved like shadows over dark water, reached 50 men from walls undetected. Commander smiled in darkness. They'd made it. Archimedes' machines needed light to aim. In total darkness, useless, 40m, 30m, soldiers prepared grapples and ropes. Could almost touch the fortification stones. Then walls lit up. Archimedes had prepared something Romans never saw: giant mirrors of polished bronze positioned strategically to reflect light from huge braziers. When lookouts detected water movement, they lit braziers simultaneously. Mirrors amplified and directed light, turning night into day in 100 of radius around walls. Roman soldiers exposed, frozen like startled deer. Then hell began. Short-range catapults kept in reserve opened fire. At that distance, with full light couldn't miss, projectiles size of melons shattered men. Claws descended, not to lift ships this time, but grabbed small boats and flipped them, throwing soldiers into water where black clothes became shrouds. Of 500 attackers, fewer than 100 returned. Survivors spoke with broken voices about how night itself turned to day, how there was no darkness enough to hide from that Greek sorcerer. Marcellus tried different, attack only by land. Concentrated all land forces on single wall point, thinking he could overwhelm defenses with pure mass. Disaster. Archimedes designed mobile wall sections. When Romans concentrated on one point, openings appeared in adjacent sections. Catapults emerged, attacked soldiers from flanks. Like sticking hand in wasp nest, Romans didn't know where to defend. Frontal attack turned into three-dimensional massacre. Surviving centurion described experience years later, like fighting a living city. Every stone seemed to have eyes. Every shadow could hide death. We attacked one point, two more attacked us. Like fighting Hydra. But worse, because this monster thought. Months passed. Roman frustration grew exponentially. Soldiers developed what we today call PTSD. Any wall movement made them jump, saw rope or beam. Panic. Archimedes' name became synonymous with terror. Historian Plutarch recorded particularly revealing incident. One day Roman engineers moving wooden beam inside camp, far from walls, totally out of weapon reach. When soldiers saw beam rise over tents, they began shouting, "Archimedes! Archimedes!" and ran in panic, abandoning posts. Legendary Roman discipline. Crumbling before psychological terror of enemy they never saw but always felt. Marcellus tried keeping morale high, but he himself had changed. General who'd arrived with absolute confidence now spent nights awake, wondering what new nightmare would emerge tomorrow. He'd begun to respect, almost admire, old man defeating him with nothing but brain. In moment of frustration, Marcellus told officers, "We're surrendering to an elderly geometer who uses us as pieces in mathematical problem. He sits in chambers moving rulers and compasses. And we, Rome's best troops, repelled like clumsy schoolboys." But admiration didn't stop siege. And inside Syracuse situation deteriorated, because Archimedes could defend walls, could repel attacks, could create terror in Roman hearts, but couldn't create food, couldn't make water appear, couldn't break blockade. Grain stores, full at siege beginning, now showed bottoms. Rations reduced, then reduced again. Children cried from hunger. Elderly began dying, weakened bodies unable to withstand malnutrition. Archimedes saw this. Something broke inside him each day. He was man of science, accustomed to problems with elegant solutions. But no equation could solve hunger. No theorem could feed a city. Assistants noticed old man spending less time perfecting war machines, more time on pure geometric calculations, as if trying to escape to a world of perfect shapes and ordered numbers. Far from horrible war reality he'd helped prolong. Because that was terrible irony. Archimedes had been so successful defending Syracuse. He'd condemned city to slow death by starvation. If he'd failed in first days, Rome would have taken city quickly. Death, yes, but brief. Instead, his genius guaranteed prolonged agony. Was that victory? Or simply more cruel defeat? In meetings with Syracuse leadership, some whispered about surrender. "We've resisted with honor," they argued. "Shown Rome we're not cowards. But our children are dying of hunger. How much more can we endure?" Others argued passionately to continue. "If we surrender now, all suffering will have been in vain. Rome shows mercy only if they believe continuing to fight costs more than city's worth. We must resist." Archimedes, when asked his opinion, simply remained silent. What could he say? He wasn't politician, not general. He was mathematician who'd found himself playing god of war, and roll weighed heavier each day. Records show Archimedes tried designing devices to break maritime blockade, small, fast boats that could evade Roman surveillance and bring supplies. But every attempt intercepted. Rome had learned to stay away from walls, but watch everything else with brutal effectiveness. Mutual respect between Marcellus and Archimedes, two masters facing epic duel, grew strangely during these months. Marcellus gave explicit orders to his men. "When we finally take Syracuse, that old man must be captured alive and treated with all respect. He's the most formidable enemy Rome has faced." Some officers protested. "Respect the man responsible for thousands of Roman deaths." Marcellus was firm, precisely because he's responsible. Respect not with brutality, but with brilliance. He's defeated us again and again. If we could bring that mind to Rome. He dreamed of taking Archimedes to Rome, putting genius at empire's service. Imagine machines he could create for legions. Fortifications he could design. Rome would be invincible. But inside walls? Archimedes didn't dream of Rome. He dreamed of incomplete theorems. Problems never solved, elegant mathematical truths waiting to be discovered. One night, youngest assistant found him drawing in workshop sand, not weapon designs, perfect circles, spheres and cylinders in harmonious proportions. Young man asked what he was calculating. Archimedes answered without looking up. Volume of sphere inscribed in cylinder is perfectly 203 of cylinder's volume. It's beautiful, so simple, so elegant. It kills no one, causes no suffering. It just exists, perfect and immutable. Assistant didn't know what to say. When all this is over, continued Archimedes, voice barely whisper, when Rome finally enters and everything I've built is destroyed, this will remain. Sphere-cylinder relationship will be my true legacy, not those things on walls. He passed hand over sand drawing, partially erasing it. War machines will be forgotten or feared. But geometry is eternal. He didn't know how prophetic his words would be. 2 years. 24 months of siege. 730 days of resistance that turned Syracuse into legend and Archimedes into living myth. But all stories, even most epic, have an end. Year 212 BC brought something neither Archimedes' machines nor Marcellus's legions could control: human betrayal. It was autumn. Syracuse celebrated festival of Artemis, goddess of hunt. Even amid hunger, even with death lurking, Syracusans needed moment of hope. Respite from despair, authorities allowed limited celebrations. Rationed wine distributed. Music filled streets for first time in months. On walls, weary guards weakened by hunger, intoxicated by unaccustomed wine. Relaxed vigilance. Just one night. Just a few hours. It was enough. A Syracusan officer named Demipus, whose family lost fortune when city switched sides against Rome, had been secretly negotiating with Marcellus for weeks. His price simple. Wealth and protection when Rome took city. His betrayal, equally simple. Small gate in northern wall section, left unguarded during celebration. At midnight, while Syracuse slept drunk on wine and tired hope, select Roman soldiers slipped silently toward that gate. No full armor. Steps like whispers. They'd waited 2 years for this opportunity. Gate opened without resistance. Rome entered Syracuse like poison in veins, silent and lethal. First guards encountered. Slipped before they could scream. Second, same fate. By time someone sounded alarm, 1,000 Roman soldiers were inside walls. Then began nightmare. Every defender fears the sack. Marcellus had given strict orders. City must be taken, yes, but with some clemency. Syracuse is, after all, Greek city of great culture, and specific order repeated dozen times. Find Archimedes. Bring him to me alive. Anyone who harms him answers to me personally. But in chaos of falling city, orders are lost like drops in ocean of violence. Syracuse's streets became rivers of blood. Soldiers humiliated for 2 years, who'd seen comrades die horribly, lived with constant terror of old man's name, finally had revenge. And revenge is always brutal. Houses looted. Families massacred. Gold and silver accumulated for centuries torn from temples and palaces. Women screamed, children cried. Smoke from fires rose into night sky. Marcellus, when he finally entered city at dawn and saw carnage, wept. Historians record he stood in square full of corpses. Tears ran down battle-hardened cheeks. Not tears of joy for victory, tears of shame for what his men had done. But greatest horror was yet to come. A young Roman soldier, eager for glory, searched for treasures in district where richest citizens lived. He entered courtyard where old man knelt on ground, completely oblivious to chaos around him. Old man was drawing geometric figures in sand with stick, murmuring calculations to himself. Soldier, covered in blood and adrenaline, shouted at old man to identify himself, demanded to know if he had valuables. Old man didn't look up. Absorbed in his problem, theorem about circles he'd been pursuing for weeks. Soldier shouted louder. Nothing. Then, furious at being ignored, stepped forward. His shadow fell over drawings in sand. Then Archimedes finally looked up, didn't see soldier. Didn't see sword. Only saw shadow had fallen over his perfect circles, distorting proportions he'd calculated so carefully. Sources differ on exact words, but most famous, one that echoed through centuries, was simple and devastating. Do not disturb my circles. Soldier, interpreting this as insolence, drew his gladius in movement practiced 1,000 times. He pierced elderly Archimedes, man who'd stopped Rome for 2 years. Genius who'd turned physics into terror. Mathematician whose name made veteran legionaries tremble. Died in pool of his own blood. Last thoughts weren't about war he'd fought, but about geometry he loved. When Marcellus learned of it, his fury was apocalyptic. He ordered soldier executed immediately. But damage was done. Rome had conquered Syracuse, yes, but lost the only thing Marcellus really wanted: Archimedes' mind. Roman general organized funeral with full military honors for his enemy. ordered elegant tomb built. On that tomb, following wishes Archimedes had expressed years before, he ordered engraved, image of sphere inscribed in cylinder with perfect 203 proportion. Old man considered his greatest discovery. No war machines, no iron claws, no catapults, only pure geometry. The irony is so perfect it seems fiction. But it's history. Man who created most terrifying weapons of his time wanted to be remembered only for elegant mathematical relationship between geometric shapes. Archimedes' blood had barely dried when transformation from man to myth began. Roman soldiers who trembled before his machines now told increasingly fantastic stories. Catapults became more precise in each account. Claws lifted larger ships. Burning mirrors, whose historical existence we still debate, shone more intensely in collective memory. But Archimedes' true legacy didn't reside in exaggerated stories. It resided in something deeper and permanent. He'd changed forever how humanity understood relationship between knowledge and power. Marcellus returned to Rome with victory, yes, but also with lessons Senate was slow to understand. His official report, unusual for Roman general, devoted entire paragraphs not to describing tactical brilliance, but explaining how single old man stopped Rome's best legions for 2 years. Syracuse didn't fall by our military power, wrote Marcellus. It fell by human betrayal, by hunger, by time itself. But while its walls were defended by Archimedes' mind, we were powerless as children throwing stones against Titan. Extraordinary admission. Rome, empire priding itself on military superiority, publicly acknowledged that intelligence could rival brute force. Roman engineers who survived siege were extensively interrogated, asked to recreate machines they'd seen. They desperately tried reproducing claws, precision catapults, night lighting systems, failed again and again. Archimedes left no plans, no manuals. Assistants who'd helped build machines could describe individual parts, but none understood underlying mathematical principles, making everything work in harmony. Archimedes' machines died with him, but ideas that made them possible, those were immortal. In decades following his death, something remarkable began happening in the Mediterranean world. Rulers began seeking their own Archimedes. Philosophers and mathematicians, previously seen as intellectual curiosities with no practical application, suddenly courted by kings and generals. Scientific knowledge ceased being purely academic, became strategic. Hero of Alexandria, living century and a half after Archimedes, built on his principles to create first primitive steam machines and automated systems. Vitruvius, Roman architect and engineer, devoted entire treatise sections to principles Archimedes discovered. Galileo Galilei, almost 2,000 years later, would call Archimedes his master and inspiration. Leonardo da Vinci, that other universal genius, obsessively studied surviving Archimedes' writings. In notebooks, Leonardo drew reconstructions of war machines based on ancient descriptions, designed improved versions. In margins wrote note perfectly capturing Archimedes' legacy. A man armed only with knowledge can stop armies. But Archimedes' impact goes far beyond military engineering. His pure mathematical discoveries, those he truly valued, form basis of entire study fields we still use today. His method for calculating area under curve anticipated integral calculus by almost 2,000 years. Work on center of gravity and equilibrium fundamental to all modern engineering. Buoyancy principle discovered in famous bathtub basis of all naval design. Every ship that sails, every submarine that dives, does so thanks to principles Archimedes first articulated. The Archimedes spiral appears in nature, from galaxies to Nautilus shells. His screw, still used to move water in modern irrigation systems. Methods for approximating P most precise for 1,000 years. That theorem he loved so much, sphere-cylinder relationship, turned out profoundly important for understanding volumes and areas in 3 dimensions, more than elegant geometry. Window into understanding space itself. Cicero, great Roman orator, visited Syracuse decades after siege, searched for Archimedes' tomb. Found it covered in weeds, almost forgotten, ordered it cleaned and restored. Expressing shame, Rome allowed monument to such genius to fall into neglect. In writings, Cicero expressed something resonating through centuries. Syracuse, once most powerful Greek city, wouldn't be remembered for kings or warriors. It would be remembered because there lived and died Archimedes. He was right. Today, few can name Syracuse's kings. Marcellus's footnote in military history books. But Archimedes is immortal. The siege of Syracuse established military precedent resonating to this day. Asymmetric warfare. Idea that weaker enemy and resources can use intelligence, innovation, creativity to level battlefield against superior power. Vietnamese using tunnels and traps against American technology. Finns during Winter War developing ski tactics against Soviet Union, modern insurgents using modified commercial drones against professional armies. All are spiritual heirs of Archimedes. Fundamental lesson is clear: in war, as in everything, adaptability and intelligence can compensate for lack of resources. Genius with limited tools can outperform army with abundant tools but no imagination. But Archimedes' story also teaches something darker about price of genius applied to destruction. Archimedes was man of peace, forced to be war engineer. His machine saved Syracuse temporarily, yes, but also prolonged suffering. Every additional day of resistance, another day of hunger for citizens. Every tactical victory, more mothers without sons, more wives without husbands, more blood. Was it worth it? Question every generation must answer for itself. If Archimedes had failed in first days, Syracuse would have fallen quickly. Massacre, yes, but brief. Instead, his success guaranteed 2 years of slow agony. Is that victory or deferred defeat? Archimedes himself struggled with this question. Records show his last years spent increasingly withdrawn in pure mathematics. As if trying to wash hands of blood his inventions spilled, he never documented weapons, never wrote about them, wanted to be remembered only for geometry. Attempt to erase that part of his life. To be remembered not as man who killed thousands of Romans, but as mathematician who discovered eternal truths. And largely, he succeeded. Today, when we teach about Archimedes in schools, we talk about buoyancy principle, pi approximations, calculation methods. We rarely mention war machines, but we should, because Archimedes demonstrates something every scientist, every engineer, every thinker must grapple with. Knowledge is power, and power is dangerous. The same mind that can cure diseases can design plagues. Same physics that powers cities can destroy them. Archimedes knew it, lived it, died without resolving fundamental contradiction. The soldier who killed him is forgotten, but Archimedes, immortal. Rome is dust. Its legions are memories, but Archimedes' geometry, physics, principles live on, taught to millions every year. Applied in technologies he couldn't imagine. Who really won the siege of Syracuse? Rome with legions, or 75-year-old mathematician with nothing but his mind? And more importantly, what legacy will you choose? Will you be remembered for force you exerted or knowledge you shared? Because in end, only one survives time, and it's not the sword, it's the idea.